course of 2020, we as a community have had to go through a ton of adjustments. A major example of this is where we gather for worship, how we gather, or at least the platform that we choose to do it on. The transition from in-person worship to an all-virtual style of worship has been exhausting, especially going back and forth as COVID cases fluctuate. As now, we have to do a lot of pre-recording and planning to go into our virtual church worship services. So many little details are going into it, such as the editing, the filming, the producing, and the overall safety and health of the participants included. The Promise United Methodist Church has been a prime example in how to adjust to this new perspective of worship. So let's take a look inside the doors.
Brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, brothers and sisters, isn't it a beautiful day? Beautiful day, beautiful day to be in God's presence. Presence. Amen. Amen.
Due to the lockdown protocol put in place in March of 2020, many church services had to endure a lockdown. Church services had to be pre-recorded and sent out via Facebook Live or YouTube or whatever platform they were using. The music had to be recorded ahead of time, band members would come into the church separately to record their parts, offertories would have to be recorded at home and sent in for editing, small groups couldn't meet in person, they had to meet via Zoom. Luckily, Pastor Amber has done a wonderful job about keeping the congregation engaged during these troubling times. In fact, when the church went back into a hybrid worship setting, meaning half in person and half virtual, they made an informative video about what it would be like to return to the building itself. And of course, they had to get a little silly with it because who doesn't need some lighthearted fun? The video discussed how to wear a mask and how not to wear a mask, how your temperature would be taken, how it wouldn't be taken, social distancing protocols, and basically just anything about the safety of the people returning to the church, and the overall comfortability of the people that would be returning to worship. Since COVID cases in Indiana are starting to skyrocket, the Promise had to go back into an all-virtual setting and go back into a lockdown. Luckily, I got to sit down with Pastor Amber and discuss with her opinions on the whole COVID situation. So what is it like to lead a congregation and keep them engaged during a virtual church service?
Yeah. So this has been something that we've had to learn along the way. So to say what it's like, I go clear back to March. And in March, we thought it would be a couple weeks of some virtual worship. And we're so hopeful, by Easter, we'll be back in worship, we'll be back to normal. And then when it wasn't Easter, we were just counting on a Pentecost. We would be back in worship at Pentecost. And so early in the pandemic, we were very much just hopeful that this would just be a short-term thing. And then, and our people did a great job of tuning in, of being involved. People really were engaged and wanted to be engaged, not just in worship, but wanted to be engaged in online check-in groups, in different Bible studies. They were just highly involved. And then in these last few weeks where we are 100% virtual again, like we were at the beginning of the pandemic, I've seen our numbers increase once again because the fear is high again. And the weather is colder again, so people are no longer headed to the lakes, or they're no longer doing those things, and so they're back re-engaged with their faith community, which tells me they never really disengaged. They knew where we were all along, but it's been like something I've never experienced before, and I think every pastor would tell you the same thing, where it is every single week we get new information, and we've had to be willing to pivot based on that new information, or if one of our people were exposed. We just have had to really be flexible and adaptable, but be very intentional to communicate to our people everything that's going on so that they know where to find us no matter what.
I also got to sit down with Mike Pratt, who runs a majority of the technology operations here at the church. What have been some of the challenges of in-person versus virtual versus the hybrid worship style?
So I think where you run into issues is that you have much like learning, right? People learn different ways, people worship different ways. And so I think for some, the comfort of being online from a health perspective is good, but I think from a tactile, meaning being able to be there and see and feel and touch worship has probably, I don't want to say diminished, but it's probably taken away from their full worship experience. And so when you're in a situation where you're forced to create a hybrid or create it all virtual or create it in person, you can't select who gets to come and who doesn't, right? And so I think you do a little bit of, not disservice, but I think that the participants are somewhat disserviced just based on how they choose or how they enjoy worship. So it's difficult, it's tough.
I also wanted to make sure that I was covering all demographics, so I found who the oldest couple was at the Promise and I spoke with them. What about virtual worship do you guys enjoy, and what do you not enjoy?
Well, since a lot of us have to stay home anyway because of COVID, it's been really nice to feel connected by the virtual broadcast. Otherwise, we wouldn't know what's going on at church. So it's been important to, we feel a part of the worship service by being able to hear the sermon and hear the music and all that. That's been very nice.
We enjoy being able to do this. We're old enough that we remember a time when we didn't have these kinds of possibilities.
Yes.
Even we would have just been staying home and not worshiping with other people at all. What I don't enjoy is like not being able to I'm a hugger and I love to hug people when I see them. It's just what I do. And so it's the same at church as it would be other places that I meet my friends, and it's hard.
I wanted to make sure I wasn't just discussing things with adults, so I also spoke to MEGHAN PRATT, who's a teenager here at the Promise Church. Do you feel engaged during virtual worship?
I do, because I watch it with my family, and I think that makes like a huge difference rather than watching it on my own, because like we can talk about what Pastor Amber said or what like the songs were, but I wish that we were actually in church, because I feel more engaged when we're actually at church.
Lastly, I wanted to speak with a parent, so I spoke with KIRSTEN Jones, who is a parent at the Promise. Do you feel safe going to worship in a hybrid setting, bringing your children into that place where there's other people?
Right now, with numbers as they are, no. But I did before numbers went crazy. He sat away from each other. Nobody sang. Everybody wore masks. We had temper. That felt safe. But now that numbers are increasing the way that they are, I think it was a good decision for us to return to all virtual.
Based on what I heard about talking with everyone about virtual worship, the clear consensus seems to be that it's no one's first choice, but they're really glad that they have the option to tune in to worship from another source besides going into the building. After speaking with Pastor Amber, she informed me that due to COVID procedures and virtual worship, we now have a greater audience base, which is really a blessing in disguise because we're reaching people in Florida or really just people who couldn't come to the church. So really, I think that's the most important thing about virtual worship, is that we are able to reach audiences that we weren't able to before. And really, I think that's the main point of the whole thing.